and gentlemen. My name is Oh Kyung, just introduced, an anthropologist from the Academy of Korean Studies. Or I should say the former professor of anthropology, as I have just retired, as Lee Bae-young just mentioned. I'm now Professor Emerita, a title which I'm not quite used to yet, because I was retired only 2 days ago. It is my great honor to introduce to you this evening the most distinguished scholar in the field of Korean studies, as well as in anthropology in general. Professor Kendall was educated at the University of California, Berkeley, and Columbia University, and has long served at the American Museum of Natural History, in addition to her teaching at Columbia University as a adjunct professor. She has also sat in editorial boards of various internationally renowned scholarly journals, such as the Journal of Korean Religions and Contemporary Anthropology Religion. However, one of the most notable achievements of Professor Kendall would be her contribution in enhancing the status of Korean studies in the global arena. Professor Kendall, who is now acting as the Vice President of the AAS, the Association of Asian Studies, the world-leading organization in Asian studies, will assume his presidency later this year. Given the relatively small population of Korean studies compared to other fields of Asian studies such as India, China, or Japan, I believe Professor Kendall's presidency of the AAS is not only her personal honor, but a great encouragement to anyone engaged in Korean studies. Professor Kendall's service and contributions has been duly recognized by numerous awards and prizes, including the Im Seok-jae Prize in 2010, which is the most honorable publication prize given by the Korean Society for Cultural Anthropology, for her book Shamans, Nostalgias, and the IMF, South Korean Popular Religion in Motion, and the Medal for Lifetime Achievement awarded by the International Society of Shamanic Research in 2007. The wide-ranging research interests and scholarly achievements of Professor Kendall can be seen in her long publication list, covering the fields of anthropology of religion, shamanic research, museum anthropology, Vietnamese studies, and Korean studies. The subjects of her publications range from marriage, gender relations, consumption, material culture, performance arts, modernity, and so forth. Of them, however, the studies related to Korean shamanism are particularly notable, the field to which Dr. Kendall has devoted herself ever since she launched in Anthropology of Korea in the 1970s. The most precious value of her studies in Korean shamanism, I believe, can be found in her ability to contextualize it in the lives of modern Koreans. Dr. Kendall approached it not simply as a vanishing archaic belief system, but she has most insightfully shown how shamanism has been transformed and gaining new meanings in the contemporary setting in the midst of drastic and unprecedented socioeconomic changes that Koreans have experienced for the past decades. As Professor Kendall is one of the busiest persons in the world, we are so lucky and thankful to have her here this evening and have this rare opportunity to hear her talk. So I suggest to give her the heartiest welcome by a big applause.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Professor Moon, for that very touching introduction. If only I could live up to all the kind things you've said. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for so beautifully contextualizing the world of Korean shamans. Thank you, Dr. Chun, for a fulsome welcome to all of us. And thank you, everyone who made this event possible. A lot of effort on the part of a lot of people. I'm very grateful. I will be talking about the lives of painted gods in the Korean shaman world. In Korean shaman practice, of course, the spirits, the gods, are invisible, but they are encountered by all of us in two material forms. The first is the most obvious, the costumed, bantering, miming bodies of the shamans as they manifest the gods during their elaborate ritual kut. The second is the bold, brightly colored paintings that hang on the walls of shaman shrines. The shaman in costume mimics the painted god. Both are intended to make visual a presence that cannot otherwise be seen. Just a sec. Okay, for many years, I was in and out of shaman shrines, and I took the god paintings above the altar as part of the scenery. They were always there. I didn't think too much about them. I made my own offerings. I placed money on the altar. I bowed my head to the floor. I lit incense and poured wine when I was directed to do so. I knew that the paintings were charged and powerful, that they were more than just representations of the gods. But I didn't really think about how this sacredness worked, in part because they were beyond reach. No one but the shamans were supposed to touch them. I did not see a connection between gods operating through the paintings hung in the shrines and gods operating through the inspired bodies of their chosen shamans. During my first field work in the 1970s, I did buy this painting from out of the Gladstone bag of a runner who visited the Fulbright House on a weekly basis. If there are any old-timers in the audience, you might remember this guy. But I did not yet question how the painting came from above the shrine and into the runner's bag. The freeform painting that I bought had very little relationship to the paintings in the walls of the shaman's shrines that I was visiting in the 1970s. In those days, they were mostly small, cheap prints or workshop productions. The collectors, of course, wanted the old freeform paintings. But from a shaman's perspective, cheap prints, workshop productions, improvisations on a pattern, or the work of visionaries, the paintings on the wall of the shaman's shrine are considered animated. They are objects that have been entered by gods who assume their seats there during a shaman's initiation ritual. Around the turn of the millennium, some anthropologists, some religious studies scholars, some art historians became interested in what we now call material religion. What is material religion? Well, it's an attempt to understand how material things, from communion hosts to Buddhist temples, from amulets to altars, work in and through religious practice, how they help to create religious experiences and religious understandings. There is much in the world of Korean shamanic practice that involves the deployment of objects and the use of objects in ritual performance to produce a space and experience at odds with the normal world. Boldly colorful things, piles of offering food, theatrical weaponry, and especially the succession of red, blue, yellow, white, and green costumes the shamans wear, combined with other sensory stimuli, percussive music, incense, lots of cups of wine, to enable the presence of a god speaking and moving in the body of a mortal woman. And presiding over it all, the paintings. It seemed that when I started thinking about material religion, I could no longer ignore the paintings. But I also wanted some allies in this investigation. I joined forces with Dr. Jong-sung Yang, a folklorist, and Professor Il-soo Yoon, an art historian, who have both written about shaman paintings, and we are trying to configure an event where we each talk about our own particular involvement in this project, but you are stuck with me alone tonight, and I take full responsibility for the shortcomings of this presentation. However, our combined book will be out this fall. What I'm giving you are the threads of it that were of most direct interest to me. I'm going to begin in a familiar space, the art gallery, with shaman paintings framed and hanging on the wall, and then follow the paintings in reverse motion back to the shaman's shrine, talk about what shamans see in them, how shamans understand them, and then talk about some points of intersection between the collecting of shaman paintings as art and the use of shaman paintings as objects in religious practice. Korean collectors began to take an interest in shaman paintings only in the late 20th century, and after Minhwa folk art had been established as a legitimate Korean thing, a precious artistic expression of the Korean people. This involved, as with Minhwa, as with folk painting, it involved a broadening of the definition of Korean art beyond an aesthetic that had traditionally valued ink paintings and subtly glazed ceramics. It is not difficult to find a Korean art historian who considers shaman paintings garish, crude, and downright creepy and unsettling. Some of you are probably feeling right now, yes, these are garish, crude, creepy, unsettling. But others love them, others avidly collect them. Aficionados had to also overcome some of their own cultural knowledge that objects from a shaman shrine had souls or yong attached to them, or in popular parlance, guishin, ghosts, demons trailing after these objects, that these were unclean and potentially dangerous things. Collectors and collector talk came to value the paintings as they had already come to value Korean folk art as artifacts from a vanished rural life. In naive-seeming freehand drawings, they found the faces of simple and pure-hearted rural Koreans from another time. Many collectors have said this to me. Of course, many Koreans see no such thing. Many people are unnerved by the bold staring faces, much as participants at a kut might be unnerved by the bold stare of a shaman. Manifesting a god, where in normal day-to-day encounters, direct eye contact is generally minimal. The shaman's face and the painted face in the painting are meant to command attention. In fact, they're meant to be a bit unnerving. For some, this makes the shaman painting an arresting image. A few collectors value some of these paintings as Picasso before Picasso. For collectors and art aficionados, power is an abstraction, as in the power of a work of art. For shamans, however, power is a corporeal experience transmitted from the gods via the paintings to the shaman's own mind and body. Shamans are bonded with gods in a relationship of mutual compatibility called hawi. The gods empower the shaman who manifests them, creates auspiciousness for her clients, and casts away misfortunes in the god's name. Through visions, dreams, bodily sensations, and intuition, the gods enable the shaman to speak and mime in the god's person and convey their will to clients. When the gods are displeased with the shaman no longer receives a clear flow of inspiration, but experiences only, she prays to the painting, and mumbling and grumbling comes through to her. It's static, in effect. In extremis, the gods might abandon the shrine, answering the shaman's supplications with cold silence. She's on her own. The shaman fosters a good relationship through her daily devotions in the shrine, through purifications and pilgrimages to sacred mountains where the presence of the god is stronger and she recharges her batteries. And there are shamans who use this analogy, recharging their batteries. They are in our world, we are in their world. Paintings as seats for the gods are a kind of connective media. God, shaman, and painting have a triangulated relationship. The presence of the painting in the shrine indicates the active presence of the god. A shaman's success is a measure of the god's favor. The god's favor is secured through the shaman's devotion. The paintings are not art to the shaman. They're not mere representation. They are an indication of presence. They are a site of presence. They are a site of inspiration, at least when they work as they are supposed to work. And as we all know in our own lives, things that are supposed to transmit power to us, like our computers, don't always work. The notion of animation links the presence of the shaman's shrine to some other religious activities found in Korea and throughout the map of Asia. The ritual animation of Buddhist and other temple statues, and the ritual activation of religious pictures and talismans. In these traditions, in China, Korea, Japan, Tibet, Vietnam, and throughout Southeast Asia, Buddhas and deities are invited to inhabit statues following a prescribed and carefully orchestrated ritual performed by a priest or ritual master. In Buddhist parlance, this is the eye-opening ceremony. Korean shamans, when they install Buddhas in their shrines, as many shamans now do, will call in a monk, or they will imitate a monkish ritual in their own way. But in the shaman's world, Buddhas and gods are dissimilar entities. The Buddhas are far gentler, they say, less efficacious than the shaman's gods. But also, the Buddhists don't make trouble for you the way angry gods do. They're more gentle, they're more detached from this world, the gods are a fierce presence, and you have to treat them right. And the animation of the paintings is not the same thing as the animation of a Buddhist eye-opening. As with other shamanic rituals, the animation of a painting lacks the certainty of a liturgical rite. It occurs within the context of an ambiguous and uncertain ritual process. Will the gods appear at all? Will the gods be sufficiently present to take up residence in the paintings? Will the gods work well with the initiates? Will the gods stay in the paintings, or will they leave? When an initiation fails, when it unambiguously fails, and the gods refuse to enter the paintings, refuse to enter the shrine, refuse to work with the shaman, then the paintings go back to the shop, and it's a dead loss for the shaman, or the would-be shaman. When an initiation is ambiguous, the gods may or may not be adequately present in the shrine. Maybe they're not there, maybe they're not there enough, maybe the shaman is operating a bogus practice. And if the gods are seriously displeased with the shaman, well, they get up and leave, even if they were there before. Dirty and tattered old paintings are deanimated and burned, and the deities are invited to inhabit fresh new paintings, a practice that makes particularly old paintings very rare, very desired by collectors. The paintings at the back of this circa 1900 stereograph were probably burned many, many decades ago. Collectors want old paintings, but deities favor clean, pure, new things. And shamans seek the deities' good favor. But used paintings also circulate within a community of shamans, as gods are transmitted from one shaman to a successor shaman. And I want to thank Dr. Baudouin Walraven for first discussing this process of shamanic transmission in English. And his work was very helpful and inspirational to me, and we're very lucky to have him with us here this evening. Ideally, an aging shaman marks the end of her practice with a major kut, a hajik kut, where she feasts and entertains her gods for one last time and sends them off. And then, speaking through the mouth of the shaman, the gods indicate where they want to go. I'll go with this apprentice. I'll go with that apprentice. I don't want to go anywhere. And so the different spirit daughters and spirit sons take some of the retiring shamans' deities into their own practice. Some shamans, because they have ruptured relationships with their former disciples, end their practices by not giving them to anyone. They take the gods and bury them on the hillside in what seems to be like a human grave. Now, sometimes that's the end of it. Occasionally, somebody, a young initiate filled with inspiration, is magically drawn to this hidden catch and digs it up. And shamans will say, yeah, that used to happen long ago when the gods were more powerful, but it still happens every now and then. They say, yeah, there was a case a few years ago. Alternatively, maybe even more wondrously, a young initiate who is wandering around like a crazy woman, and she's drawn into a shrine, an existing shrine, and she starts bowing like crazy. And this indicates that the gods are ready to take her on, and the old shaman who's kept the shrine is ready to retire. And I've heard of this sort of firsthand. It happens. A potential initiate might also be drawn to paintings that are hidden under a sheet of paper. She's being initiated in a house that was a shrine. The paintings are hidden, and she stands in front of a seemingly blank wall, shaking her bells like crazy. And that indicates that the gods, again, through the media of the painting, have pulled her toward them. They will work with her. These tales, even the most fantastic, are tales of normative transition. The gods require shamans in order to be manifest in the world. They choose their shamans and use the tangible evidence of paintings and paraphernalia to mark their relocation in a successor shaman's shrine and in her practice. But ruptures are also common. Not all shamans make adequate provisions for their own deaths, and not all gods are comfortably accommodated by their successors. In these circumstances, the paintings, like unsettled gods, acquire a liminal and consequently problematic status. What happens to these paintings? This liminality, as we shall see, also offers an aperture for the ambitions of collectors and dealers. Likewise, if a shaman dies while her shrine is still active, her paintings and other paraphernalia are charged, and her children don't want to touch them. The shaman supply shops offer a special service called an evacuation squad, a cholgoban, that goes to the house and takes down the shrine. Or sometimes rag and bone men could be persuaded to come in and take things down, even though it's dangerous to touch them. Conversations with collectors suggest that it was through this path, disassembled shrines, no successors, that paintings began to circulate first in flea markets, and then on the market they catch the eye of the collectors. They become something that's sold in shops. It is also generally conceded that the first market for shaman paintings in Korea, old shaman paintings, was naive foreigners like myself. We didn't think about the paintings having souls attached to them. We didn't think about them as being potentially dangerous. But once it was Korean collectors who really created a discourse around them, began to think about them seriously as art, began to think about them seriously as precious Korean things. The transmission to a successor shaman can be problematic. The successor shaman might not have the capacity to work with the retiring shaman's gods. One of the people I talked to described this as like a bowl of water that she carries on her head, and the bowl isn't big enough to hold all the water that's being poured into it, all this power of the spirits. She doesn't have the ability to catch it all. Or the gods might just not get along with the gods that are already in the shaman's shrine. I'll tell you a story from Youngsu's mother, the shaman I've worked with for several decades. Her sister was also a shaman, who I call Chatterbox. Chatterbox retired, and in a dream, Chatterbox's god said, "Oh yes, we'll go to your sister's shrine. She can take care of us." And Youngsu's mother herself in a dream saw the gods walking into her shrine. They thought, okay, this will work. They brought the paintings over. They held a big ceremony. They invited the gods into the paintings. And because Youngsu's mother lived in a tiny little room, she didn't have space to put the gods all, spread them out. So she took the gods that were similar in type to her own gods and put them behind. And then trouble happened. Her business was bad. Her health was bad. She began to have really troubling dreams. In one dream, 3 women came to her to have their fortune told. One woman sat down in front of the divination tray, like that tray you see here. 2 others stood over on the side. This was really uncomfortable. This was really awkward. She began to divine, aided by the great spirit grandmother, Daishin Harmony, the goddess you see in this painting, enabled her to divine by spilling rice, by casting coins, by seeing configurations from which she begins to concoct her diagnosis of the client. But all of a sudden, one of these women standing over on the side comes forward, grabs the tray, spills the rice on the floor. Youngsu's mother wakes up, feeling really bad on behalf of Daishin Harmony, on behalf of the great spirit grandmother, because it was her rice that was scattered on the floor. She goes into the shrine, and the paintings have fallen to the floor. And her Daishin Harmony and her sister's primary god, the Jade Immortal, are stuck together. She says, they've been fighting. So these are not paintings that are, or gods that are getting along very well together. So she sends off the gods from the new paintings from her sister, rolls them up, puts them under the altar. Now, this kind of circumstance, unused paintings, liminal status under the altar, might be a source when collectors, runners come along and say, hey, do you have any old paintings you don't want anymore? And they might come out, but not these paintings, because the paintings in this story, however powerful, however agentive they were cheap 1970s prints, not paintings at all. The interest of Korean collectors, museums, and dealers intersected with several possible trajectories. The paintings in an abandoned shrine that needed to be removed, the dead shaman's paintings removed by an evacuation squad, old and tattered paintings that used to be burned and replaced, the inactive paintings under the altar. When the popularity of shaman paintings peaked in the 1980s and 1990s, dealers actively sought out shamans and tried to acquire old paintings from their shrines. I was lucky enough to hear of the experiences from that moment of collecting from a dealer, Mr. K, and a professor, Professor P, who told me about their experiences in the countryside. Mr. K says, It was because we were making a museum. We asked them if they couldn't compromise a bit. They would tell us they had to replace the painting, it would take money. When we thought they would concede, we offered them some money. How much? We would bargain a little. And then Professor P says, we had to go through formalities. We set down the money and made prostrations. And here significantly, he pantomimes not handing over the money like a payment, but setting it on a tray and bowing. So they're in the ritual moment. And then I say, but didn't they think the paintings would carry an inauspicious humor, a tal, if they were removed? And Mr. K says, that's why they always set down an offering and petitioned with utmost sincerity. They couldn't just give them away without the god's permission. They had to do some sort of ritual so that nothing bad would happen when the paintings went out. We couldn't just take them. They would set down our money and kowtow and tell us to kowtow, and then they would wave the 5-colored flags. If you pulled out a red one from the bundle, they would say, well done, that's good, the very auspicious flag. And then I can't resist saying, but what would happen if you pulled out a yellow one? Very inauspicious. Mr. K says, well, then it was just our tough luck. And then he looks at me and he says, isn't this good data we're giving you? Although Mr. K speaks of bargaining, the encounter is far from a straightforward transaction. The god's consent is sought through ritual means, even as the gods can indicate their willingness or unwillingness to inhabit a shrine and work with a particular shaman. The gods have to say, yeah, we'll go with these guys from Seoul. The cache itself is not, or we will let these paintings go. We will inhabit other paintings, but we agree to let our old shell go with these guys from Seoul. The cache itself is not presented as a market transaction, but as a ritualized offering. Mr. K and Professor P were not unusual. Other collectors have cultivated relationships with shamans, eventually making small offerings, what they would call kijum, to acquire paintings that would otherwise be destroyed. Now, by now, some of you may be asking, who did the painting itself? And are these paintings still being produced? That is a bit of a story. In the tradition of shamans from Hwanghae province in the north, who are active in Seoul and Incheon today, painters came from families with very close ties to the shaman world and were in some way also themselves bonded to the gods. A very few such painters are still active. Some shamans and 2 traditionalist painters that I was able to locate and interview underscored the importance of the initial consultation between the shaman and the painter. The painter, through this conversation, has to see in his own mind what the god looked like so that he can create an image that the god will directly answer and smoothly enter and inhabit. Mr. An Jong-mo is probably the best-known living painter of shaman paintings in Korea. His mother was a shaman. His father made paper flowers for shaman rituals. Established shamans in the Hwanghae tradition are proud of Mr. An's paintings and those attributed to his father. It was a mark of distinction and, in their eye, a sign of their own good practice that they had Anshi paintings hanging in their shrine. A painter praised the work of this family. If you use paintings from the An family in an initiation ritual, initiation rituals often fail, usually fail. But if you use Anshi paintings, 60%, you have a 60% chance of success. 60% of the time the gods come out. The paintings help. Mr. An claims an uncanny ability to reproduce what the shamans described to him. He gave one example. He was painting and a little drop of ink fell on the face of the god. And the client came, he was painting a teacher of a shaman who had become a deity who would help the shaman. and the client comes and says, "How did you know? My teacher had a mole on her face just there." And that's not normal stuff. This is one of Mr. On's paintings, the white horse and robe carefully matching tradition, and the commissioning shaman's vision. She saw a white horse, she saw a deity wearing a white robe. Soul shamans commissioned paintings mostly from monk painters, goldfish monks, Gomosunim, who also painted for temples. Well into the 20th century, a shaman would go to the temple, find the goldfish monk, offer a sack of rice. The monk would bathe, and then he would use the sack of rice as an offering before beginning to work on the painting. I met one contemporary painter who is not a monk himself, but considers himself part of this tradition in terms of how he was trained and also how he approaches his work. He bathes before beginning a painting, he prays, he avoids polluting or disturbing events, he doesn't go outside because he might see an argument or an accident. And then when the commission is complete, he bathes and prays again. Although he does not lack for business, he believes that this kind of painting, very expensive to execute, is a dying art. In the 1970s, the market in shaman paintings came to be dominated by workshop or konban production rather than monks or solitary painters like Kim Hwa-baek, the painter who preserves a monkish tradition though not a monk, and Mr. An, the Hwanghae-do painter. The transition to workshop painting meant several things. The new workshop painters were trained commercial artists. They were cartoonists, they were painters of signs, they were painters of lurid movie house facades. As artists who make their living by their brushes, they were not visionaries attempting to give shape in the mind's eye to gods already glimpsed by their shaman client. Instead, they work from patterns, they copy from photographs and books, including scholarly books. And they do their work without attention to religious taboos and purification. You can see the difference. It's an old painting, a little more freeform on the left, and on the right, a very standard workshop painting of both of the Obang Shinjang, the spirit warriors of the five directions. These surviving half-completed images from the 1970s suggest a sort of mass production in the workshop, with more experienced painters filling in the more complicated details, and as in Renaissance sculpture ateliers, the all-important face is left for the last. Well-trained workshop painters can produce much requested images from memory without the aid of a pattern, and new paintings have become much more standardized. Some shamans commission paintings directly from painters, but most paintings resembles the production of an infinitely replicable commodity rather than the old interaction between a shaman and a painter that is intended to translate a personal vision into the painted image of God. Most shamans, for the last several decades, have purchased their paintings directly from the shaman supply shops, the Mamrul-san, or the shops that sell the costumes, the fans, the Buddhist statues. Those of you, again, who are old-timers will remember how these shops used to line the southern half of Chongno from about Iga to Oga. Rents have gotten too expensive, and now they're scattered. All the shops, the Mamrul-sang, are scattered through the landscape. Country markets have them. They're everywhere, like supermarkets, one of the proprietors said to me. Many of the proprietors in these shops regard their work as just a business. They're just in it to buy and sell. But some claim a connection to the gods and the shaman world. They claim that the gods help them in their business, and this forces them to be honest in their dealings with shamans. Or otherwise they'll be punished by the gods. This, of course, is a selling point among the shamans. They're going to go to somebody who is in and of their world and accountable to the same gods. For many months, and probably most, the Manmulsang proprietor acts as the intermediary when the shaman commissions a painting. Those proprietors who see themselves as taking their jobs very seriously assume some of the work that the painters used to do. They sit with the shaman and say, well, tell me, what did you see? Was the mountain god wearing a white robe or a jade blue robe? Was the general's arm raised or lowered? Was the vest white or blue? Helping the shaman to get the proper painting, the right painting for the right god. Some of our conversation partners did insist that the work of a careful painter who observed precautions and poured his soul into the work would be pleasing to the gods and consequently more efficacious than a purely commercial painting. According to one shaman who claimed that she would only buy paintings whose beauty implied that the painter had put his whole heart and soul into the task, said Mr. An produces paintings that have souls, that souls will enter, that gods will enter. Art students and commercial painters may be less expensive, but you can't really say that the gods have gone into the paintings, and they're nothing more than ordinary paintings. Another shaman told us that even though she orders from the shops, she insists that the painter have some sort of spiritual connection and that she can sense when she views the completed painting whether or not it will be an effective medium for her gods, and if it won't, she just won't buy it. The Manmulsang proprietor is a very critical intermediary then, and some of them say it takes you have to have a special energy, gi, like Chinese qi, to do this work. You have to have a special connectedness. There have been further changes in the new millennium, as South Korean workshop painters are themselves being supplanted by Korean Chinese living in the Korean Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China. The newcomers have received conservatory training and produce impressive reproductions, although some painters say, oh, they're just painting over photocopies. It's sort of like a paint-by-numbers painting. And the old painters in Korea complain, oh, with their work, the grandfathers, the gods no longer have Korean faces. Even so, it's very difficult for Korean painters, workshop painters, to compete with these cheaper paintings. All of the shops carry them. They say that this is what their clientele wants. In 2009, one shop proprietor related that of 3 of the Korean workshop painters that he was still in contact with, one had given it up and was driving a cab to make ends meet. So, concluding thoughts. Shamans engage in a living practice and they continue to install paintings in their shrines. Those shamans who do hold old paintings are aware of the value of what they have, even as they are courted by scholars, collectors, and museum curators. Through these encounters with collectors and researchers, shamans have come to regard the paintings as they now think of their own practice, through a language of heritage and heritage preservation. I want to leave you with a story from this new world of collector-shaman interactions. A venerable old shaman and her students performed at a small private museum. The director, who had collected shaman paintings since the 1960s, was really taken with one of her paintings. He begged her to give it to him. And in his telling, she couldn't part with it, but she gave him another one, almost as nice. Now, when I talked to the shaman herself, she told a slightly different story. She had performed twice at the museum, and she had seen in her vision that this was a place where many people had died badly. It had been a battle site during the war. and there were a lot of disturbed spirits hovering around the museum. She was fond of the director. She wanted to help him. She wanted to leave one of her gods there to help him out, to protect him. Her one of her generals agreed. He'd take on the task. He stayed in the museum. This was not the case of giving a second best painting. It was a case of sending the general to the museum because he had work to do. Thank you. 감사합니다.